Good morning, class. Happy Monday. Hope you are having a great beginning to your week. It is a Sunday afternoon as I am recording it, and it is wonderful outside. I cannot wait to just go out for a stroll. I've been going on very long walks with all this free time. Hope you have as well, because it's a good way to keep yourself sane and get outside a little bit. Um, we are going to talk about the hiding place today. You've had your Kahoot and your quiz, so we're pretty much ready to get back in the swing of things. One thing that I wanted to bring up was connection difficulties. Some folks have been telling me that they cannot connect to and watch their videos, which is really important because that's kind of how we're doing class for a while. So they will, I'm going to try to upload this to YouTube as well, and then send you guys a link to watch it on that platform if the Teams isn't working. I will also be continuing the Teams, so don't worry about not being able to access it in the same way that you always have. It's just if you're having problems with the way that it's done now, there will be a second way. Many of you reached out last week and asked about the three levels of questions, which you had to use for Mr. H's class. That's awesome because we are going to continue to use those in the hiding place. So the three levels of questions are level one, observe. What does the text say? These are questions with right and wrong answers. And there's nothing to argue about. It's just asking, did you read this text and can you tell me something really, uh, not always a small detail. Sometimes it's obvious and big, but it can also be not obvious and something you have to look for in the text. But it's something that's in the text itself, and there's not really a controversy around it. It's just right or wrong. Then level two, there is the think level, level two think questions, which ask your opinion, you to make a meaning out of it, and try to get at the larger point of what's going on in the text, not just a detail, but interpreting for yourself what the big meaning of all of this is. Then finally, we have level three, which is the connect questions, where you're either connecting this text to another text or you're connecting it to yourself. And that's the most important level of thinking about literature because it's changing how you see things. It's adding to your understanding of both yourself and the world. So that's kind of a big reason why we study literature because it puts us in conversation with someone else's story, and our story collides with theirs, and we have to make sense of it. Um, it's very much at the heart of all we do. And not just in history, but in our study of the hiding place, we will look at the book through those lenses. So the first part, kind of what we've been doing is I read you part of the chapter and we talk about it together, or at least I talk about it now because I can't hear you guys. And I give you some pointers on what's being said within the text. That's level one. Then at the end, we'll ask some bigger questions about what it all means, interpreting it, and then finally I'll close with some connections to how the hiding place can connect with us in 2020. Even though things are very different, there are also some similarities you will see between what it's like to enter into a war zone where everybody's kind of bunkering down and there's a lot of fear in the air. It might sound familiar as to how we're living right now, even though there's no major enemy in human bones and flesh. It's not so much like there's a military person who's attacking us right now, but there's danger in these little microbes, these little tiny viruses that aren't even cells. They're just it's a virus that's going around from person to person, and kind of wedging our neighbors apart from each other because it used to be neighborhoods used to be a place where you could get together and hang outside and throw a barbecue and get to know each other. And now, even at a neighbor to neighbor level, we have to distance ourselves and not even acknowledge each other really, besides what we're doing like this online, back and forth. Um, So you might notice some of that in the hiding place, where as soon as the war sets in and there's this German force that's occupying, meaning has taken up residence in Holland, then the Hollanders are less likely to get along. Some of them do grow tighter together, tightly knit, but a lot of them from neighbor to neighbor, there's this new fear of, I wonder what my neighbor believes. Are they joining the Dutch Nazis or are they joining the resistance? Can I trust my neighbor? Can I trust anybody right now? That's some of the things that we will be observing and thinking about and connecting. See what I did there? One, two, three. In this chapter 5. So this is where the book really takes a big step because up till now, the war has not hit. In this chapter, as you can tell from the title, it will hit. Let's start reading together on page 77. Open up your book. Pause the video if you have to go get it, but I'm going to begin now. The slender hands of the clock on the stair wall pointed to 9:25 as we left the dining room that night. That in itself was unusual in our orderly lives. Father was 80 years old now, and promptly at 8:45 each evening, an hour sooner than formerly, he would open up the Bible, the signal for prayers, read one chapter, ask God's blessing on us through the night, and by 9:15 be climbing the stairs to his bedroom. Tonight, however, the Prime Minister was to address the nation at 9:30. One question ached through all of Holland like a long-held breath. Would there be war? This isn't the central part of that paragraph, but notice that we see Father Casper setting the tone of the house by reading the Bible, not only in their morning meetings, but at night before he goes to bed. The Bible is his beginning and end, and everything in that book shapes everything he thinks about. Would there be war? We circled up the steps to Tante Jans's room, and Father went to warm up the big table radio. We did not so often spend the evenings up here listening to music now. England, France, and Germany were at war. Their stations carried mostly war reports or code messages, and many frequencies were jammed. Even Dutch stations carried mostly war news, and that we could hear just as well on the small portable radio we kept now in the dining room, a gift from Pickwick the Christmas before. This, though it was to be a major broadcast, somehow we all felt it merited the large old set with its elaborate speaker. Merited means earned. This message from the Prime Minister is important enough to earn their attention through the large radio. They're all going to sit around it, and they're not going to sit in their comfy chairs. They're going to sit in the wooden chairs because they got to take this message seriously. This is an important time. Will there be war? That's the big question. This, though, was to be a major broadcast. Somehow we all felt it merited the large old set with its elaborate speaker. We sat now, waiting for 9:30, tense and upright in the high-backed wooden chairs, avoiding, as if by a kind of premonition, the cushioned and comfortable seats. Then the Prime Minister's voice was speaking to us, sonorous and soothing. There would be no war. He had assurances from high sources on both sides. Holland's neutrality would be respected. Neutrality means that they haven't sided with either party in the war, either side of the war, so they'll be able to stay out of the war. That's the hope, anyways. It would be the Great War all over again, World War I. There was nothing to fear. Dutchmen were urged to remain calm and to... The voice stopped. Betsy and I looked up, astonished. Father had snapped off the set, and in his blue eyes was a fire we had never seen before. It is wrong to give people hope when there is no hope, he said. It is wrong to base the faith upon wishes. There will be war. The Germans will attack and we will fall. He stamped on his cigar stub in the ashtray beside the radio, and with it, it seemed, the anger too, for his voice grew gentle again. Oh, my dears, I am sorry for all Dutchmen now who do not know the power of God, for we will be beaten, but he will not. He kissed us both good night, and in a moment we heard the steps of an old man climbing the stairs to bed. Betsy and I rooted to our chairs, sat rooted to our chairs. Father, so skilled at finding good in every situation, so slow to believe evil. If Father saw war and defeat, then there was no other possibility at all. Remember, he's the one who was so patient with Otto just a chapter ago. Kind of the heart, not the heart, but a victim of this horrible evil mentality, Otto, and how he displays that in his attitude and behavior towards Christophels and his words towards Jews. Um, Even with Otto, Father saw some good in him and wanted to hold on to him as long as he could and change his mind and make him see the truthfulness of the way that he was living. But Otto eventually had to go. Um, that patient man, Casper, is now saying, stop telling us there will be peace when there will be no peace, which, by the way, is straight from the book of Jeremiah. Um, and he says, give us the real news. There will be war. So that's what he tells his daughters. Here's the same night. I sat bolt upright in my bed. What was that? There, there it was again. A brilliant flash followed by a second later by an explosion that shook the bed. I scrambled over the covers to the window and leaned out. The patch of sky above the chimney tops glowed orange-red. I felt for my bathrobe and thrust my arms through the sleeves as I whirled down the stairs. In my father's room, I pressed my ear against the door. Between bomb bursts, I heard the regular rhythm of his breathing. I dived down a few more steps and into Tante Jans's room. Betsy had long since moved into Tante Jans's little sleeping cubicle, where she would never would be nearer to the kitchen and the doorbell. She was sitting up in the bed. I groped toward her in the darkness, and we threw our arms around each other. Together we said it out loud. War. It was 5 hours after the Prime Minister's speech. That is uh, supposed to be ironic to you, meaning, can you believe that just 5 hours ago, the head of their state, the head of their country, just said, "We're at peace. Be at peace. This is okay." Nope, they're being bombed 5 hours later. How long we clung together, together listening, I do not know. The bombing seemed mostly to be coming from the direction of the airport. At last we tiptoed uncertainly out to Tante Jans's front room. The glowing sky lit the room with a strange brilliance. The chairs, the mahogany bookcase, the old upright piano all pulsed with an eerie light. Betsy and I knelt down by the piano bench. For what seemed like hours, we prayed for our country, for the dead and injured tonight, for the Queen. And then, incredibly, Betsy began to pray for the Germans up there in the plains, caught in the fist of the giant evil loose in Germany. I looked at my sister kneeling beside me in the light of burning Holland. "Oh Lord," I whispered, "listen to Betsy, not me, because I cannot pray for those men at all." What does Jesus say? Pray for those who persecute you? Try to do that when you're in a war being bombed. This is the faith of Betsy, which looks a lot like the faith of Christ, in that she is able to pray for the Germans as they are trying to kill her. Um, because I could not pray for those men at all. And it was then that I had the dream. She's having a vision. This is something new that we have not seen in this book yet. It couldn't have been a real dream because I was not asleep, but a scene was suddenly and unreasonably in my mind. I saw the Grote Markt half a block away, as clearly as though I were standing there, saw the town hall and St. Bavo's, and the fish mart with its stair-stepped facade. Then, as I watched, a kind of odd old farm wagon, old-fashioned and out of place in the middle of a city, came lumbering across the square, pulled by 4 enormous black horses. To my surprise, I saw that I myself was sitting in the wagon, and Father too, and Betsy. There were many others, some strangers, some friends. I recognized Pickwick and Tooze, Willem and young Peter. All together, we were slowly being drawn across the square behind those horses. We couldn't get off the wagon. That was the terrible thing. It was taking us away, far away, I felt, but we didn't want to go. Betsy, I cried, jumping up, pressing my hands to my eyes. Betsy, I've had such an awful dream. I felt your arm around my shoulder. We'll go down to the kitchen, where the light won't show, and we'll make a pot of coffee. The booming of the bombs was less frequent and farther away as Betsy put on the water. Closer by was the wail of fire alarms and the beep of the hose trucks. Over coffee standing at the stove, I told Betsy what I had seen. Am I imagining things because I am frightened? But it wasn't like that. Oh, it was real. Oh, Betsy. Was it a kind of vision? Betsy's finger traced a pattern on the wooden sink, worn smooth by generations of ten booms. I don't know, she said softly. But if God has shown us bad times ahead, it's enough for me that He knows about them. That's why He sometimes shows us things, to tell us that this too is in His hands. That's all the context you're going to get in this moment for what this vision is supposed to mean. I don't know what you think it means. Let's look at it closely though. Um, she's seen in a town market very close to her, the Grote Markt, this wagon, old-fashioned and out of place, old farm wagon with four black horses. Note, she even sees the color of the horses and how they're looking at it from a distance. There's a distance between them as she's first observing them, and then next, boom, she and her family and others are in the wagon, and they're not the ones driving the wagon. They are being drawn, pulled away from their home into some other place. And that's all that happens in the vision. It's scary to her. She wants to tell Betsy soon about it. And Betsy says, even when we are foretold about bad news, that this is God telling us that it's in His hands. He's seen this too. And so He's informing you about what could happen. Okay. If you've ever read the books of the prophets, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Habakkuk, all the minor prophets as well, Joel, Amos, all of these guys, and who knows if there was women writers that had added on as well, um, are prophesying not just predictions about the future, but they're giving you images to show you how to understand the present. Maybe we'll talk more about the prophets in relation to this book as well. But in the Bible, they have a role of trying to make sense of disaster. I'll say that one more time. When you read the books of the prophets in your Bible class or on your own at home, what those people, those authors are trying to do is make sense of disasters as they're happening in Israel. Let's talk about this book now, though. Sorry for the tangent. For 5 days, Holland held out against the invader. 5 days, not very long. We kept the shop open not because anyone was interested in watches, but because people wanted to see father. Some wanted him to pray for the husbands and sons stationed at the borders of the country. Others, it seemed to me, just came to see him sitting there behind his workbench as he had for 60 years, and to hear the ticking clocks, a world of order and reason. I never opened my workbench at all, but joined Betsy making coffee and carrying it down. We brought down the portable radio, too, and I set it up on the display case. Radio was Harlem's eyes and ears. That's a metaphor for you. And a very pulse rate. For after that first night, although we often heard planes overhead, the bombing never came so close again. The first morning over the radio came instructions that ground floor windows must be taped. Up and down the Barteljorestraat, shop owners were on the sidewalk. There was an unaccustomed neighborhood feel, as advice, rolls of adhesive, and tales of the night's terror passed from door to door. One store owner, an outspoken anti-Semite means someone who is anti-Jew, meaning they would discriminate against Jews willingly. So, again, Jews are dispersed among the countries. It's not as if Holland was a Jewish country. It just means that there was Dutch people, and some of those Dutch people were also Jewish, and some of those Dutch people were also anti-Jewish. Okay, where were we? Um, One store owner, an outspoken anti-Semite, was helping Vail, the Jewish furrier, put up boards where a pane of glass had shaken loose. The optician next door to us, a silent, withdrawn individual, came over and taped the top of our display windows where Betsy and I could not reach. So apparently this is Holland coming together, at least for these 5 days, where the anti-Semite is helping the Jew, and the withdrawn, meaning shy or reserved individual came over. That is supposed to show you that people are asking differently during wartime than they were before. A few nights later, the radio carried the news we dreaded. The Queen had left. I had not cried the night of the invasion, but I cried now, for our country was lost. In the morning, the radio announced tanks advancing over the border. And suddenly all of Haarlem was in the streets. Even father, whose daily stroll was predictable as his own clock chimes, broke his routine to go walking at the unheard hour of 10 a.m. It was as though we wanted to face what was coming together. We wanted to face what was coming together. The whole city united, as though each would draw strength from each other Hollander. And so the three of us walked, jostled by the crowd, over the bridge on the Sparn, all the way to the great wild cherry tree whose blossoms each spring formed such a white glory that it was called the Bride of Haarlem. A few faded petals clung now to the new-leafed branches, but most of the bride's flowers had fallen, forming a wilted carpet beneath us. A window down the street flew open. "We've surrendered!" The procession in the street stopped short. Each told his neighbor what we had all heard for ourselves. A boy of maybe 15 turned to us with tears rolling down his cheeks. "I would have fought. I wouldn't ever have given up." Father stooped down to pick up a small bruised petal, like a flower, from the brick pavement. Tenderly, he inserted it in his buttonhole. "That is good, my son," he told the youngster, "for Holland's battle has just begun." This is a play on words, because of course the battle just ended and it only lasted 5 days. But I think what Corrie ten Boom wants you to see, in the words of her father Caspar here, is that there is another battle going on besides just the one, as the Apostle Paul would say, of flesh and blood. There's more than just the battle of violence against Germany and towards the rest of Europe. There's also a battle that can take place that has to do with you sacrificing your own comforts for the persecuted people around you as a way of battling Germany that isn't violent. There are nonviolent ways to battle. It's hard to understand, but that's true. Um, and Casper's going to engage in that battle, that nonviolent resistance. But during the first months of occupation, life was not so very unbearable. The hardest thing to get used to was the German uniform everywhere. German trucks and tanks in the street, German spoken in the shops. Soldiers frequently visited our store, for they were getting good wages, and watches were among the first things they bought. Toward us they took a superior tone, as though we were not quite bright children. But among themselves, as I listened to them excitedly discussing their purchases, they seemed like young men anywhere off on a holiday. Most of them selected women's watches for their mothers and sweethearts back home. Indeed, the shop never made so much money as during the first year of the war. With no new shipments coming in, people bought up everything we had in stock. Even the Winkeldochters, the shop daughters, merchandise that had lain around so long it seemed part of the furniture. We even sold the green marble mantel clock with its twin brass cupids. The curfew, too, at first was no hardship for us, since it was originally set at 10 p.m., long after we were indoors in any case. What we did object to were the identity cards each citizen was issued. These small folders containing photograph and finger points had to be produced on demand. a soldier or a policeman, the Haarlem police were now under the direct control of the German commandant, might stop a citizen at any time and ask to see his card. It had to be carried in a pouch about the neck. We were issued ration cards too, but at least that first year the coupons represented food and merchandise actually available in the stores. Each week the newspapers announced what the current coupons could be exchanged for. That was another thing it was hard to adjust to. Newspapers that no longer carried news. Long glowing reports of the successes of the German army on its various fronts. Eulogies of German leaders, denunciations of traitors and saboteurs, appeals for the unity of the Nordic peoples. Quote, but not news that we could trust. And so we depended again on the radio. Early in the occupation, Haarlemers were ordered to turn in all private sets. Realizing it would look strange if our household produced none at all, realizing that it would look strange if our household produced none at all, we decided to turn in the portable and hide the larger, more powerful instrument in one of the many hollow spaces beneath the old twisting staircase. Both suggestions were Peter's. He was 16 at the time of the invasion and shared with other Dutch teenagers the restless energy of anger and impotence. Peter installed the table radio beneath a curve in the stairs just above Father's room and expertly replaced the old boards, while I carried the smaller one down to the big Vroomen Dresman department store where the radio collective was being made. The army clerk looked down at me across the counter. Is this the only radio you own? Yes. We consulted a list in front of him. Ten Boom, Castor, Ten Boom, Elizabeth. At the same address. Do either of them own a radio? I had known from childhood that the earth opened and the heavens rained fire upon liars, but I met his gaze. No. Only as I walked out of the building did I begin to tremble, not because for the first time in my life I had told a conscious lie, but because it had been so dreadfully easy. Wow. Let's pause and talk about how life in Haarlem changes in the first phase of this new occupation. So they surrendered after 5 days of warfare, basically nothing. And when they surrender, the German troops come to occupy the spaces, and the Germans in general try to organize Haarlem life and the life of Holland. And they do that by issuing these identification cards. Um, it's as if they are turning the citizens into numbers, basically. Numbers meaning not people with names and identities, but just someone who could be quickly picked out. Um, we'll learn more about this and how it was used wickedly as a way of identifying who was a Jew, because that was the target of the German, one of the targets of the German tasks was to pick out the Jews from the pack and push them off into one part of the town, that's called a ghetto, or sometimes just take them to a concentration camp, which you may have heard some about, which we will talk about more in this book, unfortunately. Okay, after they have the ID cards, we have ration cards, which is like a type of currency where you get this many ration cards, and you can use those cards to buy foods, because food in wartime is harder to come by, so it needs to be divvied out in a way that makes sure everybody can get some. That's at least the ideal view of what ration cards are good for. But it quickly turns out that a lot of these rations are almost useless when the when the food supply goes down, obviously. So we have ID cards, ration cards, and then they start um, taking more restrictive measures. They're restricting what the Hollanders can do and taking away their freedoms. And so, one of the obvious ways that people in Holland could resist Germany, now that they're being occupied, is through communicating through newspapers and radios. And so, Um, they they have to take away the radios. And but if you just ask someone to give up their radio, are they going to, or are they going to lie? So that's actually what the Ten Booms do. And we see Corey having this ethical struggle. Should I give up the radio the way that I'll hear about all of the other Hollanders and how they're dealing with this occupation and how we can resist? Or should I just give in to this person who is ordering my radio be taken away from me? She chooses the first option. She's going to lie about whether she has another radio or not. She gives up a few radios and says, Here, we're turning them in. We are following instructions. But she doesn't tell the whole truth because they have another radio that they're hiding in their staircase. They think that it's essential that they hold on to this. Notice, Casper um, doesn't stop her from lying in this moment. Um, this is her taking a very decisive step in trying to understand how she's going to live as a follower of Jesus in a time of persecution. She hasn't even started talking about how this is going to work, but she's started acting in a new way, where it's not simply don't lie ever for any reason. Now she's starting to say, well, sometimes it's necessary to follow Jesus in a time of persecution that you do have to lie to certain people. I'm not saying you have to agree with that, but I'm saying that's what Corey's saying in the book. I just noticed we're at 32 minutes, and I don't want to make this go on any longer. I would like you to finish the chapter of invasion for tomorrow. So that's chapter 5. I want you to read all the way through chapter 5 and answer the one question that we will have going along with that, with our everyday assignment. So um, I had more I wanted to talk about, but there's plenty of time to talk about that in the future. I'll call this the end of this lesson and let you start reading the rest of the chapter with the few more minutes that you have in my designated hour. Okay, I will see you tomorrow. Bye, class.